My name is Meredith. For as long as I can remember, my mind has operated in numbers, balances, and ledger sheets. As a certified public accountant, I spent my days looking at the world through the cold, comforting lens of logic. If the assets match the liabilities, the system works. If there is a deficit, you find it, correct it, and move on. I applied that exact same black and white logic to my personal life, naively believing that if you invest love, loyalty, and unwavering support into your family, the universe guarantees a positive return. I thought that blood was the ultimate contract, an unbreakable bond that naturally protected you from the harsh realities of the world. I was dead wrong. For 7 long, agonizing years, my husband Elliot and I faced a completely different kind of deficit, one that no amount of financial planning could fix. We were desperately trying to start a family. Every single negative pregnancy test felt like a physical blow to our chest. We went through rounds of failed treatments, endless doctor appointments, and spent thousands of dollars watching our bank accounts drain while our hearts broke in tandem. Elliot was my absolute rock through every tear-filled night. He never faltered. He worked double shifts, held my hand through the bleakest moments, and constantly reminded me that our love was enough, even if it was just the two of us. Then, the miracle happened. I still remember the exact date my phone lit up with the digital lab results confirming my pregnancy. We cried tears of pure, unadulterated relief. When the doctors told us it was a boy, and we chose the name Owen, it felt like the ledger of our lives had finally been perfectly balanced. But our joy came with a heavy asterisk. Because of my medical history, the doctors classified my pregnancy as extremely high risk. I needed specialized care, expensive weekly monitoring, and a guaranteed fund for an intensive delivery process. Elliot and I didn't hesitate. We locked down our lifestyle, cut out every single luxury, and meticulously saved exactly $15,000. That money wasn't just a savings account, it was Owen's lifeline. It was the armor that would protect our miracle baby the moment he entered this world. I truly believed that my parents, Walter and Pauline, shared in this sacred joy. I thought their frequent check-ins and sudden interest in my health were driven by grandparents' love. My corporate-trained brain completely missed the warning signs. I couldn't see that they weren't looking at their future grandson with anticipation. To them, my high-risk vulnerability wasn't something to protect. It was a vulnerability to exploit. They didn't see a miracle baby. They saw a 6-figure jackpot waiting to be cashed out. Before I tell you how I took my calculated revenge from a hospital bed, I want to know who is standing with me today. Drop your country and your current time in the comments. It honestly gives me so much strength to see where in the world you guys are watching this from. To understand how my own flesh and blood could look at my high-risk pregnancy as a financial payout, you have to understand the toxic ecosystem of my childhood home. Growing up, my father, Walter, was always a man chasing the next big high. He wasn't interested in the slow, steady grind of a normal career. He wanted the fast track, the shortcut, the instant gratification. By the time I was in high school, that desperate need for a quick win morphed into a devastating, hidden gambling addiction. He started with sports betting, moved to high-stakes poker, and eventually found his way into the dark, unregulated world of underground casinos. To the outside world, Walter was a charming, charismatic family man. Inside our walls, he was a ticking time bomb whose mood completely depended on the rotation of a roulette wheel or the cards dealt from a dirty deck. But Walter couldn't have survived a single year without his ultimate enabler, my mother Pauline. Pauline is a woman obsessed with appearances. She would rather swallow glass than admit to our neighbors or her friends that her husband was systematically draining their life savings. Instead of confronting the rot, she covered it up. She became the master architect of his excuses. When the utilities were shut off, she claimed it was a city maintenance error. When Walter cleared out my childhood college fund, she told me the bank had suffered a catastrophic investment failure. She taught me, through years of subtle conditioning, that family secrets must be guarded at all costs, even at the expense of your own financial survival. Because I loved them, and because I was trapped in that cycle of manipulation, I became their safety net. 2 years ago, Walter came to my office shaking, crying real tears, claiming that a legitimate business investment had gone south and that he was facing immediate foreclosure on his house. He swore on his life that if he couldn't find $2,000 by the end of the week, he and Pauline would be out on the street. I looked at my mother, who sat beside him nodding in tears, validating every single lie. Elliot and I didn't have that kind of money just sitting around, but I begged my husband, liquidated some of our personal assets, and handed Walter a cashier's check for $2,000. I thought I was saving my parents' home. It wasn't until 3 months later, when a casual acquaintance mentioned seeing Walter VIP serviced at an elite, illegal poker den across the state line, that the sickening truth clicked. He hadn't paid a mortgage. He had paid off a violent back-alley bookie, and Pauline knew the entire time. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She looked at me with cold eyes and said, "He's your father, Meredith. It's your job to take care of him." That was the exact moment the emotional ledger fractured for me. I realized that in their eyes, I wasn't a daughter to be cherished or a mother-to-be to be protected. I was a transaction. I was a high-yield account they could withdraw from whenever Walter's debts caught up to him. Elliot was furious when he found out, and together, we drew a hard, unyielding line in the sand. We went completely low contact. We focused entirely on our own lives, our upcoming miracle, and building the impenetrable wall of safety that would become Owen's $15,000 fund. I swore to myself that I would never let their financial poison touch my husband or my child. But I completely underestimated just how deeply Walter's addiction had consumed his humanity, and how far Pauline would go to keep her husband out of a ditch. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning in my 8th month of pregnancy. Elliot received an urgent, non-negotiable notice from his firm. To secure his upcoming promotion, the one that would provide our family with top-tier healthcare coverage, he had to travel out of state for an intensive 72-hour corporate certification seminar. The location was deep in a mountainous valley with notoriously terrible cellular reception. I was massive, exhausted, and dealing with painful Braxton Hicks contractions, but I hugged him tight and told him to go. "We'll be perfectly fine, Elliot," I whispered, kissing his cheek. "Owen and I will just stay on the couch and rest." But Elliot was terrified of leaving me entirely alone in our house for 3 days given my high-risk status. That's when Pauline called. Her voice on the phone was dripping with rare maternal warmth. "Meredith, sweetie, let your father and me take care of you while Elliot is away," she cooed. "Come stay in your childhood bedroom. I'll cook your favorite meals and we can look through old baby albums." It sounded like a dream. It sounded like the reconciliation I had secretly prayed for over the last 2 years. Against Elliot's better judgment, but to ease his anxiety, I packed a small overnight bag and drove over to my parents' house. I thought I was walking into a sanctuary. I didn't know I was walking straight into an ambush. The first 24 hours were strangely peaceful. Pauline made tea and Walter kept his distance, speaking softly and asking polite questions about my due date. But on the second evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted into something suffocatingly cold. It started when Pauline suddenly announced she had to drive 3 towns over to run a late-night errand for her church group. She didn't look me in the eye when she said it. She practically rushed out the front door, leaving the house completely silent. 10 minutes after the sound of her car faded down the driveway, the kitchen door creaked open. Walter walked in. His face wasn't the warm, smiling face of a future grandfather. It was pale, sunken, and sweat was beading at his hairline. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely manic. He didn't offer me water. He didn't ask how I was feeling. Instead, he dropped a thick stack of papers onto the kitchen table right in front of me. "I need you to sign these, Meredith. Now," he muttered, his voice shaking with a terrifying, desperate energy. I looked down at the papers. My accountant brain instantly scanned the bold legal lettering. It wasn't a medical release form. It was an immediate, untrackable wire transfer authorization from my personal bank account. He was demanding exactly $15,000. "What is this, Walter?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "This is Owen's medical fund. You know Elliot and I saved this for the delivery." "I don't care about the delivery," he suddenly roared, slamming his fist onto the table, making the glasses rattle. "I owe some very dangerous people across the state line, Meredith. They tracked me here. They know where I live. If I don't wire them $15,000 by midnight tonight, they are going to break my legs and burn this house down. Your unborn baby doesn't need that money right now. I do." I sat there, frozen in sheer terror, clutching my pregnant belly as my father cornered me in his kitchen. But the true heartbreaking betrayal arrived a second later. Walter's phone, which was sitting face up on the table next to the documents, buzzed with an incoming text message. Because I was looking down, my eyes instantly read the preview on the lock screen. It was from Pauline. The text read, "Is it done yet? Make sure Meredith signs the transfer before Elliot gets back into cell service. We don't have much time." A wave of nausea washed over me. My mother hadn't gone to a church errand. She had intentionally abandoned me in this house to let her unhinged husband bully his pregnant daughter. The entire invitation was a calculated, orchestrated scam. My own parents were willing to sacrifice my life and the life of my miracle baby just to clear a gambling ledger. The moment those words on the glowing screen sank into my brain, something inside me completely died. The terrified, vulnerable daughter who had spent her entire life begging for her parents' approval evaporated right there in that suffocating kitchen. In her place stood the cold, calculated accountant who handled high-stakes financial fraud for a living. I looked at the text message from Pauline, then looked up into the frantic, sweating face of my father. My heart stopped racing. My breathing went completely flat. I realized that crying, pleading, or appealing to a humanity that Walter had long since lost to the roulette wheel was a total deficit of time. Being kind wasn't just useless anymore, it was dangerous. Walter thought he had the perfect layout. He thought Elliot was safely out of reach in a mountainous dead zone, completely unable to intervene. He thought I was just an isolated, emotional, 8-month pregnant woman who would fold under pressure to keep the family peace. But he completely underestimated who he was dealing with. He forgot that I don't just track numbers. I anticipate liabilities. Weeks ago, the moment the doctors told me my pregnancy was high risk, I knew I had to build an absolute fortress around our savings. I knew Walter's history, and I knew Pauline's capacity for deception. So, long before packing my overnight bag for this nightmare trip, I had quietly walked into my firm's legal department. I had moved every single penny of that $15,000 out of our standard joint checking account and locked it away into an ironclad, legally impenetrable, irrevocable trust, explicitly named for our unborn son, Owen. The terms of that trust were simple, but deadly for someone like Walter. It legally required my physical signature, Elliot's signature, and a fully notarized authorization to release even a single dollar. I didn't even have the legal power to wire that money tonight if I wanted to. On top of that, before entering this house, I had configured a hidden panic alert shortcut on my smartwatch. If my heart rate spiked past a certain threshold, or if I pressed the crown 3 times, it would instantly broadcast my live location and a covert audio stream directly to our local precinct. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, looked Walter straight in his bloodshot eyes, and let out a soft, mocking laugh. I pushed his fraudulent wire transfer papers right back across the table. "I'm not signing anything, Walter," I said, my voice completely devoid of fear. "And even if I did, that money is entirely out of your reach. You've already lost this game." When my words cut through the tense air of the kitchen, Walter's face transformed from desperate panic to pure demonic fury. The realization that his submissive, rule-following accountant daughter had completely outmaneuvered him broke whatever tiny thread of sanity he had left. He looked at the rejected papers, then back at me, his chest heaving under his sweat-stained shirt. "You arrogant little bitch!" he screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "You think you can lecture me in my own house? You think you can tell me what I can do with my family's money?" Before I could even think to turn or shield myself, Walter lunged across the space separating us. His hand shot out, wrapping tightly around my hair with brutal, unforgiving force. A sharp scream tore from my throat as he violently yanked my head backward, forcing me to look up into his manic, unhinged eyes. I clawed at his wrists, desperate to break his grip, crying out for Owen, but he was completely blinded by his addiction. "You're going to authorize that transfer, Meredith, or I swear to God you won't leave this kitchen alive," he roared. With a sickening, violent shove, he hurled my entire body sideways. I lost my footing completely on the slick floor. Time seemed to slow down into a horrific nightmare as I fell. I couldn't brace myself. My 8-month pregnant stomach slammed directly into the sharp, unyielding edge of the granite kitchen counter with terrifying force. The physical impact was blinding. A sharp, white-hot agony exploded through my lower abdomen, stealing the air right out of my lungs. I collapsed onto the freezing kitchen tiles, clutching my belly as tears instantly flooded my eyes. And then I felt it. A sudden, warm rush of fluid pooling beneath me. The impact had violently ruptured my water, triggering an immediate traumatic labor. "Walter, please," I choked out, my voice dropping to a desperate whisper as a massive, agonizing contraction seized my entire body. "The baby. Call 911. But there was no mercy in that house. Walter stood over me, looking down at the fluid on the floor, his face draining of all color. He didn't rush to help me. He didn't grab the phone to call for an ambulance. Instead, pure cowardice took over. He looked at his car keys on the counter, grabbed his jacket, and without casting a single backward glance at his bleeding, agonizing daughter, he turned his back and ran out the door. The heavy thud of the front door slamming shut echoed through the empty house, leaving me completely alone in the dark, fighting for my child's life. My agonizing screams pierced through the quiet suburban evening, echoing out of the open kitchen window. I lay on the freezing tiles, counting the seconds between the brutal contractions that were forcing my body into immediate traumatic labor. Just when I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness, the front door was violently kicked open. Our lifelong neighbors, the Whitfields, had heard my cries from across the driveway. They rushed inside, took one look at the fluid and blood on the floor, and immediately called 911. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of paramedics and police cruisers illuminated the entire block. As the medical team carefully lifted me onto a stretcher, the police officers were already examining the crime scene. They found my smartwatch still broadcasting the live audio, capturing every single word of Walter's extortion, his violent threats, and the sickening sound of the physical impact. By the time the ambulance rushed me into the emergency room, Elliot was already sprinting through the double doors, his face pale with terror. The emergency beacon from my watch had managed to pierce through his dead zone just in time, and he had pushed his car to its absolute limits to reach me. He took my hand, his tears falling onto my knuckles as the medical team rushed us into the delivery room for an emergency C-section. Through the grace of God and the sheer brilliance of the surgeons, our beautiful son, Owen, was delivered healthy and whole. When they placed his fragile, breathing body against my chest, the nightmare of the kitchen completely dissolved into pure, victorious peace. But the real, calculated karma was unfolding outside the hospital walls. Armed with the audio recording from my watch and the incriminating text messages left on Walter's computer, the state police launched a massive, immediate manhunt. They didn't have to look far. Walter had fled straight to his usual underground poker den, desperately trying to gamble his remaining cash to find a way out of the state. The police raided the casino, dragging Walter out in handcuffs in front of his fellow gamblers, utterly ruined and disgraced. Pauline was arrested less than 2 hours later when she drove back to the house, confidently expecting to find a signed wire transfer form. Instead, she was met by a team of detectives waiting in the driveway. Both of my parents were formally charged with conspiracy to commit grand theft, felony extortion, and aggravated domestic assault resulting in emergency labor. Because they had fled the scene of a life-threatening medical crisis, the judge completely denied them bail. Sitting in the quiet, sunlit hospital room, watching Elliot gently rock Owen to sleep, I felt a deep, unyielding sense of justice. Walter and Pauline had spent their entire lives trying to manipulate, cheat, and steal to protect their superficial world. Now, they are facing a minimum of 15 years in a state penitentiary, their reputations completely shattered, and their finances entirely obliterated by legal fees. They thought they could treat my family as an open ledger to be robbed at will. Instead, they learned the hardest lesson of all. When you cross an accountant, every single debt is eventually collected in full, and my family is finally safe, wealthy, and completely free.